Hello, hope I'm doing well, and welcome back to Worship Wednesday. Today, we have a long awaited subject on my part, and this video took a lot of time, many months of prep, many months of research. So I hope you enjoy it, put a lot of work into it. But we have Honolulu. So, USS Honolulu will be the eighth member of the Brooklyn class of light cruisers, and the final member before the St. Louis subclass, of which there are two, bearing the hull designation CL 48. She would be the second U.S. ship to bear the name of the capital of the then territory of Hawaii, her predecessor being a cargo ship and her successor being a submarine. The Brooklyns were designed to be a successor to the Omaha class, and they would be the first light cruisers in over a decade the U.S. had built. They were now classified as light cruisers. Previously, they would have been armored or protected cruisers. But due to the London Naval Treaty, light cruisers are now qualified as ships under a maximum displacement of 10,000 tons, with a maximum gun caliber of 6-inch main guns. They would be 600 feet long at the waterline, and a notable feature was their aviation facilities were moved aft as opposed to amidships, as in on the New Orleans class, the Pensacola's, Northampton. And this is a feature seen in U.S. battleship design and would go to be the basis for all future cruiser design. The Brooklyns became very influential with their design and how they built these ships. For their main armament, the Brooklyns would feature five 6-inch 47 caliber triple mounts, which were designed for extremely fast fire, being able to reach sustained broadsides of 150 rounds per minute. And the layout of these guns was interesting, as you saw in the previous photo, with turrets 1 and 2 being a super firing pair facing forward, while turret 3 is facing towards the bridge and had a rear angle of fire. This was also seen in the Takao class of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Now, the sheer rate of fire of these guns would later earn the Brooklyns the nickname by the Japanese of machine gun cruiser, just because they can dump an incredible amount of ammo downrange very quickly. During gunfire training off Guantanamo Bay, Honolulu's captain noted of the training, those who saw us practice said it looked almost like a stream of bullets were playing on the targets, which are almost continuously obscured and drenched by water. So, very fast firing, just overwhelming firepower. For their secondary armament, it would be very consistent among the initial class, with upgrades later on during the war. The two St. Louis subclass, being St. Louis and Helena, getting some slight changes. So, for the main Brooklyns, including Honolulu, they would start out with 5-inch 25 caliber dual purpose guns and single mounts along the side of the ship. St. Louis and Helena would get twin mounts instead of the 5-inch 38. For armor, they had a 5-inch thick belt, a 2-inch thick deck, and 6.5 inches of armor on the front plate of their main batteries. The Brooklyns also had a significant radar suite that would serve them well in shore bomber duties and the various night actions they took part in, having surface search, air search, and radar controlled gunfire. And the previously mentioned aviation facilities included 6 seaplanes, launched from 2 catapults, and the seaplanes started out being Curtiss SOC Seagulls. They were later upgraded, but you can see them here. I have a little video of them flying. Honolulu was constructed at the New York Navy Yard in Brooklyn along with many of her sister ships and was launched on August 26, 1937, being sponsored by Miss Helen Poindexter, who was daughter of then governor of the territory of Hawaii. And after her June 15th, 1938 commissioning, Honolulu's shakedown cruise took her to the Caribbean and then to Europe, where she stopped by Portsmouth, took up a secret cargo of 20 tons of gold bullion from the Bank of England for transfer to the U.S. Federal Reserve in New York. This is estimated to be worth over $20 million then, or over $1 billion in 2023 money. She received a brief post shakedown refit to iron out any potential issues crew found during her shakedown voyage. Honolulu was then made flagship of Rear Admiral Harold Stark's Cruise Division 9, Crew Div 9, before heading back down the Caribbean for training and participation in fleet exercises and fleet problems. After winter, Honolulu crossed Panama Canal, and Rear Admiral Husband Kimmel took over as the new commander of Crew Div 9 as Honolulu made her way up to San Francisco. By July 4th, 1939, she was crossing the Pacific to the territory of Hawaii. Upon her arrival, Honolulu received a grand reception. A pilot boat outside the harbor was carrying a party from the Honolulu Chamber of Commerce, and there's a photo you can see on screen of a traditional Hawaiian canoe rowing alongside her. When she was docked, a giant lei was laid across her bow, and thousands toured her throughout the days that followed. Several parties and social events were thrown near her to honor her arrival, and she's reunited with her sponsor, Helen Poindexter, who gifted the ship a present from the territory of Hawaii, a silver punch bowl with a set of 48 silver cups, reflecting the ship's whole number of 48. As a gift in return, the ship's carpenter constructed a model of the ship and gifted it to the mayor of Honolulu. While ashore, the crews always wore the leis they were presented upon their arrival, and once the ship departed, they all dropped them in the water at the same time to signify that they would return. In July 1940, Honolulu's Captain Oscar Smith was relieved by Captain Harold Dodd, who took her to Puget Sound Naval Yard for an overhaul. After her overhaul, Honolulu made a few stops along the west coast before heading back across to Hawaii, and during these stops, she was down in LA when, as she was leaving the port, a fishing boat attempted to overtake Honolulu and cross in front of her, but ended up causing a collision. Just a glancing blow that didn't cause any damage to either vessel. Now, before all the action starts in late 1941, I wanted to go over her nicknames, of which two I found. Both I initially found from a site compiled by a gentleman who wanted to share his father's story during World War II, the site being pineapplemaru.com. Found them in her war history, the official one by the Navy. So the first nickname, as already stated, Pineapple Maru, is curious as Maru is used for Japanese ships, and with Maru meaning round or complete circle, and it was like a good luck charm saying they will complete their voyage and be home safely, which is very nice. And another ship, USS Hornet, had a similar name, Horny Maru, shortening Hornet down to Horny as a nickname, and then Maru. And as for the pineapple part of her nickname, the fruit has been associated with the Hawaiian Islands since it was introduced in the early 1900s, and at the time, Honolulu was known as the pineapple capital of the world. Now, as for a second nickname, I've seen a couple theories, and there's one that stands out the most to me. I've seen a couple of variations on it, but it seems consistent, and I also want to go with this theory because it has a personal connection to myself. So the other nickname was the Blue Goose. It came from a number of sources potentially. The main one that face value and what you can see on screen is at a certain point in time she had a dark blue camouflage, and I also mentioned that the Nene geese of Hawaii, which are descendant from Canadian geese that flew over, look a little bit different, and so kind of playing off that. Another is to honor and perhaps copy some of the luck of a B-17 Flying Fortress already bearing the Blue Goose nickname, who always managed to make it home safely, raid after raid, no matter how much she got shot. And my favorite theory, and the one I'm going to go with, comes from her war history, as well as a reunion group for USS Honolulu, CL-48, on Facebook, where a member's grandfather served aboard and told a story of where the name came from. At the time, Honolulu didn't have a nickname, and her captain decided to have a contest where the winner would get $100 and a week of shore leave. Almost all the men aboard spinning to win that prize. That's a pretty good prize. And the winner was a young sailor that had barely been aboard 2 weeks, and his reasoning was got the name from the large amount of produce crates sitting on the ship, waiting on the docks, from the company Blue Goose Produce. And on her war history, it mentions that sailors had seen all these crates lying in her mess halls and seeing around. So a very similar type story, but coming from the Blue Goose Produce Company. This name is more personal for me because where I grew up, it's more of an agricultural area. It's being more suburbanized, but still has its roots in agriculture. There's a railroad that goes through, and along the middle of town, there's old packing sheds, and one of them is the Blue Goose fruit packing shed. And found out, same Blue Goose company that was across the West Coast. So, every day I'd see this big blue building with this orange circle on the side with a blue goose on the side. And here's a photo that they had shared on the Facebook group because they picked up an old crate from the time, and so it spurred on to make them the post and share the story. So I like the story, and every day I saw this, so it makes the ship more special to me because it has a personal connection like that. Now back to the history. On the fateful day of December 7th, 1941, Honolulu was docked at one of the repair piers at Pearl Harbor alongside her sister, St. Louis, when the Japanese made their attack. You can see them in the background there. Her gunners fought back against the Japanese, and fortunately Honolulu wasn't too badly damaged, but a 500-pound bomb went through the cement pier 15 feet away from her and pierced through the pier and exploded in the water, and the concussive blast dented in her hull and caused internal damage and some minor flooding. So she had to go into dry dock until January 1942, when she went on to a convoy escort, first stopping in San Francisco, then going on to Melbourne, Australia, being one of the first ships in that group of the Americans to make that trip after December 7th attack, into New Caledonia and to Guam before returning to Hawaii. On May 29th, Honolulu departed for Alaska to help defend against the Japanese invasion of the Aleutian Islands. During her time in Alaska, Captain Robert Haler took command on July 25th, 1942. This man would be very important to her throughout her career. A short time later, Honolulu would fire her main guns anger for the first time, shelling Japanese held positions on Kiska Island, joined by cruisers Louisville, Indianapolis, sisters Nashville, St. Louis, plus the destroyers Elliott, Reed, Case, Ridley, and McCall. The surprise caught the Japanese off guard and resulted in the sinking of enemy ships and shore facilities being set ablaze. And on August 21st, she was screening the first landings at Adak Island. And on September 20th, Holly departed for a location she would unfortunately become very well acquainted with, Mare Island shipyards in the San Francisco Bay Area. Fortunately, at this point in time, she had not suffered any major damage, so she was just simply getting an upgrade. But after her overhaul, she departed on convoy duty on November 3rd, Pacific Theater, where she later arrived in Espiritu Santo. On November 26th, Rear Admiral Mahone Tisdale came aboard and once again made Honolulu a flagship, leading a group of 4 heavy cruisers and 6 destroyers to disrupt a Japanese resupply convoy coming down the slot. The task force was destroyers Fletcher, Perkins, Maury, Drayton, heavy cruisers Minneapolis, New Orleans, Pensacola, light cruiser Honolulu, heavy cruiser Northampton, and destroyers Lamson and Lardner. In the ensuing Battle of Tassafaronga, would start a bit of a jinx reputation for Honolulu, in which whichever ship that sailed directly behind her seemed to face misfortune. Ilka aboard Honolulu noted the night, calm seas full of Japanese torpedoes, which turned out to be a very accurate observation. Although the American formation had good use of their radar in the dark conditions and destroyed the Japanese destroyer Takanami, the Japanese quickly unleashed a swarm of long-length torpedoes to devastating effect. Minneapolis and New Orleans took hits that blew their bows off. Pensacola that took a hit that killed all power, communications, and steering. Seeing this, Honolulu's captain personally took the helm and managed to navigate her past the damaged cruisers without taking any damage, including to fire on the fleeing Japanese destroyers, causing minimal damage. Northampton attempted to follow behind Honolulu, but didn't increase her speed or maneuver as well, and took 2 torpedoes for her efforts, and her fires later caused her crew to abandon ship and she went down. While the Japanese were not able to resupply Guadalcanal, which was their goal, the loss of a heavy cruiser and 3 being put out of action for exchange for 1 destroyer made the Battle of Tassafaronga a huge disappointment and one of the Navy's worst defeats. After a month at Espiritu Santo, performing escort duty and doing gunnery practice, Honolulu returned to the Solomon Islands, joining a new task group led by Rear Admiral Walden Ainsworth aboard Honolulu's sister ship, USS Nashville. In January, Honolulu's task force patrolled the slot, and on the 5th, they bombarded Munda Airfield. During this operation, Honolulu's Jinx would strike again when she was attacked by 3 Japanese dive bombers, resulting in near misses and some splashes of water, with some things being taken off temporarily, mostly because the men got soaked. With the ship directly astern of her, HMNZS Achilles suffered a bomb hit on turret 3 that killed 11, wounded 11 more, and made the turret inoperable. Another interesting historical note in this engagement was the first usage of the VT fuse, and it was shot by not Honolulu, but her sister, Helena's 5-inch secondaries. January was fairly uneventful, operating out of Espiritu Santo, except for on the 13th, when a plane from Enterprise's VB-10 crashed 1,500 yards away from Honolulu. We then dispatched 1 of her boats to the crash site. The next few months were fairly peaceful, just doing patrol duty around Espiritu Santo, while also doing training and aiding Enterprise and Saratoga in their flight operations. And on the 12th of March, Rear Admiral Ainsworth relieved Rear Admiral Tisdale of his command and shifted his flag to Honolulu. On the 11th of May, Honolulu's task group headed out to bombard the areas around New Georgia, with the bombardment coming on the 13th. Honolulu herself expended 1,020 rounds of 6-inch shells and 157 rounds of 5-inch shells over the course of 21 minutes. Like I said earlier, these guns fire extremely fast. They were called machine gun cruisers for a reason. While retiring to Tulagi for refueling, 4 F-4Us that were supplying air cover fired the machine guns into the water at low altitude in front of Honolulu for no apparent reason. Normal patrol and harbor defense work occurred regularly, with the task force patrolling around to stop the Tokyo Express making supply runs down the slot. Honolulu's task force next major action wouldn't occur until July 4th through the 5th, when they were covering the landings at Rice Anchorage on the New Georgia part of Kula Gulf. During this bombardment, Helena used up all her flashless powder, which would lead to tragedy for her later on. With the bombardment, everything was going to plan. Nothing out of the ordinary. When USS Strong was struck and later sunk, at the time, it was believed to either caused by a Japanese submarine torpedo or a mine, but it was later found out that It was caused by a destroyer launched torpedo. And showing the sheer range of the long lances, destroyer Niyazuki scored what is believed to be the longest successful torpedo hit of the war at 11 nautical miles or 20 kilometers. The longest proving once again that it is a ship killer and is to not be underestimated. During the following afternoon, the sisters Honolulu, St. Louis, and Helena retired south before receiving orders to head back up to the slot to prevent a Tokyo Express run into Cold Gulf that night. Three cruisers would be escorted by destroyers Nicholas, O'Bannon, Radford, and Jenkins into the Battle of Kula Gulf. A Japanese task force attempted to land troops and supplies using 7 destroyers, with an additional 3 acting as escort. They entered Kula Gulf just before Honolulu's group did, splitting their transports in different landing locations. While the American force had thought they had the element of surprise, the Japanese had actually detected them 30 minutes prior, due to the Japanese having one radar set aboard Niyazuki. American cruisers opened fire upon the escort group of Niyazuki, Suzukaze, and Tanakaze, and Honolulu and her sisters immediately turned Niyazuki into a floating pyre. Unfortunately, Helena's rapid fire with her smokeless powder, not flashless powder, caused her gun to illuminate her like a beacon, and the Japanese took advantage of this, and shortly after, 3 long lances launched from Suzukaze and Tanakaze struck her on her port side as the American shifted targets away from Niyazuki. Helena's bow was blown off by the first torpedo, and the next 2 killed in the water, causing her to flood rapidly. Sadly, another example of Honolulu's jinx, with Helena being the ship directly behind Honolulu during this encounter. And it's sad because it's always sad, but this time it was one of her sisters. Radford and Nicholas were attached to look for survivors, while the rest of the task force retreated to Tulagi, having sunk 1 destroyer and damaged others. And later, some of the Helena's survivors were transferred from the destroyers to aboard Honolulu. Later, HMNZS Leander was assigned to replace Helena. And about a week later, on the 12th, Honolulu's task force again would face off against the Japanese, making a Tokyo Express run not far from the previous engagement and would be known as the Battle off Kalamanjara. The American task force once again thought they had the drop, and this time the destroyers that were leading the formation were ordered to launch torpedoes, and once torpedoes hit their enemy, the rest of the force would open fire and smother the enemy. This is a tactic they learned from the Japanese. Unfortunately, the Japanese managed to detect the Americans again, but this time not using radar directly. Instead, they used equipment that could detect radar and could detect it from a much further range. So they couldn't use it to guide their guns, but they knew someone was out there. Honolulu quickly opened fire on Jinsu, and with St. Louis joining in, the Japanese cruiser quickly met the same fate as Niyazuki, being smothered in shell fire and go up in flames. Unfortunately, the Japanese had already launched their torpedoes and they began to find their marks. First crippling Leander, who, suffering from the jinx of Honolulu, was directly behind her and was crippled and had to be escorted away by Radford and Jenkins. Despite attempts to evade, St. Louis didn't react fast enough and was struck in her bow, losing the bottom section. And while she evaded 6 long lances at first, luck finally ran out for Honolulu, being struck in her bow and losing the forward 60 feet of it, causing the upper portion to collapse almost completely vertical. After this, while attempting to evade the USS Gwyn, who had also been hit and was out of control and on fire, Honolulu turned hard to starboard and was struck by another long lance, this time directly in her stern. Fortunately, this one was a dud. It punched a hole in the ship, but I imagine the sailors lost a few years off their lives from this distress, but they were grateful that the aviation facilities did not go up in flames. Honolulu and St. Louis were able to retire to Tulagi, where temporary repairs were done before she headed to Espiritu Santo for solo more repairs, where she received a false bow so she could make it back home. And then she went on to Pearl Harbor, where she received her new replacement bow, arriving on the 16th of August. Afterwards, she left for Mare Island for more extensive repairs and overhaul until November 13th. During these repairs, she gained an open bridge, and her 1.1 AA guns were replaced with 40mm twin and quad mounts, and her well-used 6-inch main guns were replaced after firing thousands of rounds. Once these repairs and upgrades were complete, Honolulu headed once more towards Hawaii, making final preparations for leaving for the South Pacific on the 4th of December. Honolulu crossed the equator on December 7th, and the Polywogs paid tribute to King Neptune and joined the Order of the Deep for the traditional hazing ritual for any sailor to have not crossed the equator. Upon her arrival at Espiritu Santo on December 11th, Honolulu was once again being flagship as Rear Admiral Ainsworth returned on the 14th after temporarily using St. Louis as a flagship since she arrived a few weeks earlier than Honolulu did. Christmas time found Honolulu and St. Louis bombarding the Japanese positions on Bougainville Island, hitting enemy barges and deep supply depots on the east side of the island. Patrols were done around the island until the 28th, When Crew Div 9 retired to Port Purvis on January 8th, Honolulu and St. Louis went to bombard the Shortland Islands and received fire from the 6-inch shore batteries. After a successful bombardment, the cruisers went down to screen the landings on western Bougainville. During one of these actions, one of her 5-inch guns lost all power and had to be operated manually, and her captain, Captain Haler, cited the gunner's endurance and determination, having fired over 100 salvos manually. On the 13th of February, Honolulu and St. Louis went to cover landing operations on Green Island, and while on patrol as dusk was setting in, 6 Japanese Val dive bombers attacked the sisters. Unfortunately, St. Louis was sailing astern of Honolulu at this time, and the jinx struck her. She suffered 2 near misses and 1 direct hit that killed 1 officer and 25 men. Despite many more contacts throughout the night, none resulted in further attacks. On March 25th, Honolulu's beloved Captain Haler was relieved by Captain Harry R. Thuber after Captain Haler was promoted to Rear Admiral. The crew was sad to see their captain leave after he displayed remarkable leadership, bravery, and humility, and when presented with awards for service aboard Honolulu, Captain Haler took every opportunity to sing the praises of his brave crew. Honolulu then experienced a strange period of quiet for the next few weeks, doing no more than exercises and practices until early May, when she participated in rehearsal landings on Guadalcanal. On June 4th, Honolulu would depart from the Marshall Islands to prepare for the bombardment of Saipan. She spent the next 2 months supporting the invasion of the Marianas Islands. During the invasion of Guam, Honolulu spent 6,600 rounds of 6-inch ammunition and almost 4,000 rounds of 5-inch ammunition just bombarding Guam. When the island's capture was imminent, Honolulu headed to Iwaniwak to refuel and resupply, departing back to Purvis Bay, where she had spent her period of relative idleness. Under the command of Rear Admiral Oldendorf's task group, Honolulu participated in the bombardment of Paolu starting September 12th, 1944, and remained off the island until the 29th. During this time, she was the first large ship to enter the coastal passage. After arriving in Manus and spending 12 days there, Oldendorf's bombardment fleet sailed for Leyte, arriving on the 18th of October, missing up a few bad days of sailing due to a storm. Honolulu was assigned to an area near Dulog Town and Catmon Hill to bombard and face no return fire. On the 20th, a Japanese plane dropped a bomb 1,000 yards away from Honolulu and 500 yards away from Portland, resulting in no damage. Later that day, Honolulu was still in position, moving slowly, awaiting further bombardment orders, when a lone Japanese torpedo bomber appeared. By being hit and set on fire, it managed to launch its torpedo, and the torpedo struck Honolulu on her port side, causing severe damage and many casualties. Damage control efforts got the flooding under control and credit to her list. Sadly, during a later air attack, another ship accidentally fired into one of Honolulu's 44mm mounts, resulting in more dead and wounded. The following day, Honolulu left for Manus, entering a floating dreadnought for repairs, before being patched up for a return to the mainland United States. She left Manus on November 19th and sailed for Norfolk, Virginia, arriving on December 20th, having sailed 11,000 miles. Honolulu would spend the remaining of World War II being repaired and upgraded, with her refit lasting until October 1945. During this time, Honolulu underwent a full upgrade that all surviving Brooklyns were due to receive, and a few did, but most did not. These upgrades were a torpedo blister, and her secondaries were upgraded to the twin 5-inch 38s, and she got an electronics and radar suite upgrade. After a post-refit shakedown cruise in the Caribbean, Honolulu was assigned to be a training ship in Newport, Rhode Island, and on January 8th, 1946, Honolulu would enter the Philadelphia Navy Yard for decommissioning and was replaced in reserves on February 3rd, 1947, where she sat with her sister, Savannah. On October 12th, 1959, Honolulu was finally scrapped, not joining her other sisters going to South American nations. Her and Savannah stayed in the United States and were later scrapped. On her scorecard, that was held on her bridge, claimed credit for 1 cruiser, 4 destroyers, 4 planes, and 8 bombardments. On the debit side, she lists 3 torpedoes and 1 bomb. She finished her career with 9 battle stars. So now it's time for the in-game stuff. Her hat is that of a Rear Admiral. Rear Admiral Ainsworth wore a very similar hat, so it's referencing her long history as a cruiser flagship. Now it's interesting that her hair is red instead of blue, with her Blue Goose nickname making it a very easy choice for her to remember Boise, St. Louis, and Helena having blue hair. But I think it was intentionally done as red to reference her namesake city being on a volcanic island, and the red being signifying the fiery lava. Her choker that looks like a bow could reference her replaced bow after losing at Kolombangara. And while I always interpreted her chain around her neck representing her bringing a treaty era design, Belfast has a similar chain. This isn't even consistent among her sisters, so it's like just an anchor chain add for extra detail. Now, one detail that's always seemed odd about Honolulu's design to me is she's the only current member of her class out of all of her sisters to not have the underboob window. Now, once we get Savannah or Philadelphia or both and see if they have the window or not, maybe we'll see if it's because she got a torpedo blister and later in her career they also got the blisters. Maybe that's covering up the, I don't know, personality. She is very self conscious about her figure, and she can often be rude because of it because she thinks they're staring at her, they're jealous, they only care about her because of her chest, things like that. Unsure why exactly, other than maybe she has low self esteem due to her bow being blown off, and there's a correlation there. Like if you were very tall growing up or very short growing up, and people point out a lot, you become self conscious of it. That could be a thing. And I don't consider her an actual tsundere, maybe a soft one. But if she was more closer to Nelson, maybe not Nelson. Nelson's just kind of rude. But it could be a reference to being fiery like the volcanoes of Hawaii, similar to her hair color. She's very caring to those close to her, such as her sisters, Leander in her secretary story, and is very protective of Helena, since she was flagship when Helena was lost in their actual history, and she likely feels some guilt from that. For her one skill, full firepower, referencing the 15 6-inch guns she possesses, being able to unleash a stream of rapid fire shells. Quotes for her self intro, like many other ships, has like 1,000-foot view of her service, and mentioning losing her bow at Kolombangara and losing Helena at Kola Gulf. Sector Outline kind of retorts the commander's comment that despite her being named Honolulu, she doesn't seem very Hawaiian, but she was built in New York. So Sector Outline 2, showing she wants to care for her sister Helena, wants the commander to help cheer her up. Her defeat line is a bit sad, says she doesn't want to go Mare Island again, because other than the first time she went, every time she went to Mare Island, she was in very rough shape. For her skill activation, she says, this time, things should go well. It seemed like every battle Honolulu was in, things just never seemed to go her way. Tassafaronga, she made it out unscathed, but the task force got eviscerated. Kola Gulf, she lost Helena. Kolombangara, her and St. Louis both lost their bows. Gwen got obliterated, and she later got torpedoed. And she has a storyline with St. Louis as well as Helena, but with Helena she talks about keeping her safe. Honolulu and St. Louis are sisters. St. Louis is the cruiser merely following Honolulu. She is CL-49, and they all spent a huge chunk of their career together. That's why I mentioned them together a lot until Honolulu got damaged at Leyte. St. Louis carried on. Honolulu was back being repaired. And lastly, in her Umbrella Girl skin, so it's like the schoolgirl one, in the acquisition, she uses the umbrella, and you can see it in the art cover her backside. I think it could be because she's self conscious and wants to avoid people looking at her behind because she got hit with a torpedo in the stern in her past. Could be. Could be looking too much into it. So I want to thank you all very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I put a lot of effort into this. It's months in the making. I procrastinated. I found more info at the last minute and it's like, oh, I want to make sure this is right. So I hope you found it useful and educational. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.